Hi guys, okay, so in Unit 3 we talked about land-based empires from the years 1450 to 1750. These empires had multiple unique factors that went into their expansion, administration, and belief systems. Let's talk about expansion first. Starting with Europe. Things are starting to look up for Europe right now. The plague is winding down, the 100 Years' War is coming to an end, and the printing press has just been invented, meaning the rate of literacy has gone up in Europe. Feudalism is also becoming less popular due to the rise of new monarchies in Europe with centralized power. Their control was gained through control over religion, military, and taxes. Also, due to the decline of the clergy and nobles, the middle class is beginning to become more popular, but we'll talk more about that later. Now let's move on to Russia. Russia is easily getting wealthy through trade and begins expanding east under the rule of Ivan the Terrible. The use of gunpowder also aided in Russia's expansion and was good for trade. Now on to East Asia. The Yuan dynasty was overthrown by the Ming dynasty in 1638, and they restored and expanded the Great Wall. The Qin dynasty then took over in 1644, and China began to expand into Central Asia using gunpowder. Next, the Ottomans. They seized Constantinople in 1453, and they used gunpowder and cannons to break down the city's walls. The Ottoman Empire gained from the several trade routes surrounding the city. They also went on to conquer parts of Hungary and other smaller territories, using gunpowder. And now the Safavids. They conquered most of Persia and some of Iraq under the rule of Ismait, who was only 14 to 15 at the time. And of course, they used gunpowder to their advantage. The dominant religion at that time was Shia Islam, while the Ottomans was Sunni Islam, which caused some conflicts. Next, the Mughals conquered northern India under the rule of Babar, with the use of gunpowder. Another ruler, Akbar, led the most prosperous period of the Mughal Empire and built the Taj Mahal, which was meant to be a tomb for his wife. Now, administration. Basically, how did leaders get in control and how did they let their subjects know they're in charge? Let's start with Europe again. Europe had three main tactics: the divine right, the justices of peace, and absolutism. The divine right basically stated that God put the king on the throne so that the king could carry out God's will. It was put in the people's minds that to disobey the king is to disobey God. The justices of peace were commissions to help keep peace over legal disputes, like land ownership. And absolutism took place mostly in France. Absolutism is when all the power goes to one person, usually the king. The Ottomans used the devshirm, which is commonly translated as the blood tax. They would take Christian boys from their homes and educate them on philosophy and the arts, but also train them to be fierce soldiers called janissaries. These soldiers were extremely loyal to the Sultanate and they were feared by many. Meanwhile, in East and Southeast Asia, the Ming dynasty wanted to completely eradicate any mention of Mongol rule, so they made it so that the positions of power were only available to Chinese people. Let's talk about Japan. In Japan, the daimyo, or landowners and nobility, completely broke up Japan into smaller territories that were constantly battling with each other. As some daimyo unified, Japan became more unified. Tokugawa Ieyasu led a victory at the Battle of Sekigahara, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate. The government was then rearranged so that all the power from the daimyo was given to the shogun, or the leader. Next, let's talk about the Mughals. While Akbar was ruling the Mughal Empire, the kingdom was expanded. While he was at it, he created the zamindars, a group of people that would go out and collect taxes and do whatever their leader told them to. Next, how did these places legitimize their power? How did they let people know they were in charge? There were three popular ways: through art, architecture, and religion. Art told people that their kingdom and culture was beautiful. Architecture gave people a sense of pride, glory, and capability. A good example of this is the Taj Mahal. It was just meant to be a tomb for Akbar's wife, but they built it into something more beautiful. And religion is a big one because it gave people a sense of belonging or cultural togetherness. While we're on the topic of religion, let's move on to the belief systems. This is important because religion is the main reason empires expand. Let's start with Europe again. Their main focus was Christianity, mostly branching from the Roman Catholic Church. However, the influence began to fade when kings wanted more control than the church. And people began to doubt the church because of logic and the plague, and the church being corrupt by selling indulgences and selling rolls in the church. Selling roles in the church means the wealthy controlled the church, and that was not good for the lower class people. However, a man named Martin Luther didn't like what was going on with the church and came to the realization that salvation came through faith alone and not through the selling of indulgences. So, he wrote the 95 Theses, which was basically everything wrong with the church. And with the invention of the printing press, the theses quickly spread throughout Europe, sparking the Protestant Reformation. The church relied on the money from the indulgences, so they definitely did not like this. The Council of Trent eventually righted the church's wrongs, and freedom of religion became slightly more widespread. Alright, now the Ottomans and the Safavid Empire bordered each other, but had rival beliefs. The Ottomans were Sunni Muslims while the Safavids were Shia Muslims, and this caused constant conflict between the two. On the contrary, the Mughal ruler Akbar was extremely tolerant to various religions, including Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam, and so on and so forth. These empires had many similarities and differences. Religion was a main focus, and art and architecture were important factors in their culture. Gunpowder played a large role on empires in the East, and almost all of these civilizations had religious divisions of some sort. The expansion of empires was an important time of growth for these civilizations, and was a large factor for where they ended up in the future.